Hello, everyone. This is S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to talk about some of the most significant biblical prophecies. Specifically, I'll focus on Daniel. The prophet Daniel lived between 605 BC and 530 BC. He and his fellow Israelites were captives in Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. After correctly explaining one of King Nebuchadnezzar's dreams, he was given a position of power under him. King Nebuchadnezzar had a puzzling dream which he couldn't explain. He called on numerous wise men of Babylon, yet no one could tell him his dream. They figured it was impossible, as we can't read others' minds. This angered the king, so he decided to put all of the wise men in Babylon to death, but Daniel stopped him. He interpreted his dream as follows. He said, "Your Majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth." This was a dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. "Your Majesty, you are the King of kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind, and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything. And as iron breaks things into pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united, any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor will it be left to another people. It will crush all of those kingdoms and bring them to an end, but it will endure itself forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of the mountain, but not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces." The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. This dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Scholars have interpreted the four kingdoms to be Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. Jesus appeared during the reign of the Roman Empire. Upon his resurrection, God set up a kingdom that would never be destroyed, one which would last forever. Daniel often prayed to God, and the Lord gave him numerous visions and prophecies. In Daniel 9, Daniel begins with a prayer and a confession to the Lord. He says, "We have sinned and done wrong. We have been wicked and rebelled. We have turned away from your commands and laws. We have not listened to your servants, the prophets, who spoke in your name to our kings, our princes, and our ancestors, and to all of the people of the land. Therefore, the curses and sworn judgments have written in the law of Moses, the servant of God, have been poured out on us because we have sinned against you. For your sake, Lord, look with favor on your desolate sanctuary. Give ear, our God, and hear. Open your eyes and see the desolation of the city that bears your name. We do not make requests of you because you are righteous, but because of your great mercy." The angel Gabriel suddenly appeared to Daniel and gave him a prophecy. He said in Daniel 9:24-27, 77s are decreed for your people and your holy city to finish transgression, to put an end to sin, to atone for wickedness, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up a vision and prophecy, and to anoint the most holy place. Know and understand this, from the time the word goes out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until the anointed one, the ruler, comes, there will be 7 sevens and 62 sevens. It will be rebuilt with streets and a trench, but in times of trouble. After the 62 sevens, the anointed one will be put to death and will have nothing. The people of the ruler who will come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come like a flood. War will continue until the end, and desolations have been decreed. He will confirm a covenant with many for 1 7. In the middle of the 7, he will put an end to sacrifice and offering. And at the temple, he will set up an abomination that causes desolation, until the end that is decreed is poured out on him. According to the Jews for Jesus, 77s of years equals a period of 490 years, which is 70 times 7. A 490-year period was decreed for the accomplishment of the final restoration of Israel. The Jews for Jesus link the purposes of the 77s as follows: to finish transgression, to make an end of sins, to make reconciliation or atonement for iniquity, to bring an everlasting righteousness, to seal up vision and prophecy, and to anoint a most holy place, the Jewish temple. There are several times when the word went out to restore and rebuild Jerusalem. The first option to start the countdown is 539 BC, with the decree of Cyrus, king of Persia, which permitted the Jewish people to return to Jerusalem. A second option is in the decree of Darius, king of Persia, which let the Israelites continue their building project in 515 BC. Another option is 458 BC, when King Artaxerxes of Persia decreed that any of the Israelites in my kingdom, including the priests and Levites, who volunteer to go to Jerusalem with you, may go. The final option is when King Artaxerxes sent Nehemiah to Jerusalem with letters to the governors of the Trans-Euphrates for protection to rebuild its structures in the month of Nisan in the year 444 BC. That's in Nehemiah 2, 1-8. Biblical scholars have supported the latter option and the start date of 444 BC. The final option seems the most likely because Nehemiah and Ezra were instrumental in rebuilding Jerusalem and bringing back its exiles. With the blessings of King Artaxerxes, Nehemiah traveled to Jerusalem and became its governor in 444 BC. He worked with numerous Israelites to rebuild its walls and structures. Though he faced much opposition, he persisted, knowing his efforts were supported by the Lord. Once the walls were rebuilt, 42,360 exiles returned. Ezra spent much time carefully reading them the book of the law of the Lord. Many seemed unaware of the laws and their many transgressions. They confessed their sins and repented, promising to carefully follow the law in the future by not intermarrying with other groups of people, not working on the Sabbath, and keeping the Lord's house purified. They also purified themselves ceremoniously and offered great sacrifices to the Lord. Nehemiah 12:27 says, "At the dedication of the wall of Jerusalem, the Levites were sought out from where they lived and were brought to Jerusalem to celebrate joyfully with the dedication with songs of thanksgiving and with the music of cymbals, harps, and lyres." The 77s were divided into 3 separate units: 7 sevens, 62 sevens, and 1 7. During the first time period of 49 years, Jerusalem would be built again with street and moat, even in troublous times. The second block of time, 62 sevens for a total of 434 years, immediately following the first for a total of 69 sevens, or 483 years, according to the Jews for Jesus. At the end of the 483-year time period, unto the Messiah, the Prince. In the time of Daniel, people believed years contained only 360 days, which, when multiplied by 483, comes to 173,880 days. Dividing that by 365.25 gives us 476 years. Adding that to 444 BC and accounting for the no-zero year results in the year 33. According to Hayner, in 1978, the report to Nehemiah occurred in Chislev, which is November-December 445, and the decree of Artaxerxes occurred in Nisan 10, March 30th of 444 BC. Using a start date in 444 results in the prediction that Jesus would be put to death in the spring of 33. Numerous scholars have supported the following date for Jesus' crucifixion, April 3rd of 33. Furthermore, as predicted by Daniel, the temple that had been rebuilt was destroyed by rulers, the Romans, in 70 AD. According to some, and this is often said amongst atheists, but I've also seen it even with some Christians who are liberals, or even some Christians who are evangelicals, they think the scholarly consensus on the book of Daniel is that the book of Daniel was written in the 2nd century BC. Such a consensus makes me wonder about whether scholarship is controlled by people who are skeptical of the supernatural inferences in Daniel's prophecies. Accordingly, I'm going to address the literature on this topic. The book of Daniel begins in 604 BC, which is 18 years prior to the destruction of the first temple in 586 BC. Daniel and several other young men, as noted in 1:4, were deported from Judah to Babylon under King Nebuchadnezzar. The book ends 2 years after the 70 years of exile in 532 BC. The book is written in both Hebrew and Aramaic. The Hebrew portion was written directly for the Israelites. The Aramaic portion must have been written for the Gentiles. The Aramaic portion is in Daniel 1, 2:4 to 7:28. The first 6 chapters detail historical records of this time period, while chapters 7 to 12 detail Daniel's visions. Perhaps it is detailing of historical records led to its classification within the Jewish scriptures as writings instead of prophets, or it could also be due to the fact that Daniel was working under Nebuchadnezzar. Skeptics have often pointed to this classification to suggest that Daniel's prophecies were of minor importance. It should be noted that Daniel is placed between the books of Esther and Ezra and Nehemiah, which also contain histories and were written in the early Persian period. Lamentations, written by the great prophet Jeremiah, is also in the writings. Furthermore, Jesus, who is considered a Jewish rabbi, referred to Daniel as a prophet in Matthew 24:15. In his book Against Christians, Porphyry in 285, or around 285, put forth the notion that Daniel was written no earlier than 165 BC. Porphyry made this assertion based on Daniel 11:21, which he believed was a prophecy about Antiochus Epiphanes IV. Porphyry determined that Daniel must have written the book in hindsight, not in advance. Others in recent times have jumped onto Porphyry's bandwagon, making similar claims of later dating. These later dating scholars are biased by their refusal to acknowledge fulfilled prophecies. If we didn't have the Dead Sea Scrolls, which scholars believe are dated to around 150 BC, skeptics would have said Daniel was written after 70 AD, when the temple was obliterated, just as he prophesied in 927. We have numerous reasons to believe the book of Daniel was written when Daniel said it was written, between 604 BC and 532 BC. I will list a few of them. For one, Daniel refers to himself in the first person in much of the book and makes a dating claim himself. Second, the languages are written in a way that is consistent with the ancient forms of the languages in those centuries. They were not written in a way consistent with dating around 165 BC. According to Wilson, the Aramaic of Daniel aligns in orthography, syntax, and etymology with Egyptian papyri of the 5th century BC and of the Aramaic of the North Semitic inscriptions of the 9th, 8th, and 7th centuries BC. Wilson in 1997 notes that Daniel has a mixture of Hebrew, Persian, and Babylonian words and differs from the Aramaic of the Nabateans. The Nabateans also spoke Aramaic, yet this group of Arabs was not established until the 3rd century BC. Numerous scholars have identified Old Persian words that were no longer in use in the 2nd century BC. One example is the word Ashpenaz, which appears in Daniel 1:3. Which was unknown in the 2nd century and was translated as a personal name with an unknown meaning. Yet it meant innkeeper, according to Haufwat in 2013. I have references, by the way, on my blog at christian-apologist.com. Skeptics also point to the instruments mentioned in Daniel, suggesting that they were Greek in origin and therefore not likely to be in Babylon. Kitchen in 1965 states only 3 words of one class, music, are involved. Greek wares reached all over the ancient Near East from the 8th century BC onwards. Greek mercenaries and artisans served in the Babylon of Nebuchadnezzar. Greek words occur in Imperial Aramaic at the end of the 5th century BC, and there is nothing to stop them appearing earlier. It is unjustifiable to hold that Greek words in Aramaic imply a date after 330 BC. Many Old Persian words, alongside hardly any Greek words in our text, suggest a date in the Persian Age. A document of Hellenistic date with a penchant for loan words should not have taken them from Greek or Middle Persian. Hence, a 2nd century date cannot be based on 3 Greek words. A very late 6th century date is early enough for the body of Persian words. Between these dates, no greater precision is possible linguistically. Greek loans are explainable since the famous Orientalist W.F. Albright demonstrated that Greek culture penetrated the ancient Near East long before the Neo-Babylonian period, according to Lau, 1999. Additionally, the ancient historian Josephus recorded in Against Apion 1:8 that the canon of the Jewish scriptures was closed at the reign of Artaxerxes between 465 and 425 BC. His passage is as follows: "For we have not an innumerable multitude of books among us, disagreeing from and contradicting one another, as the Greeks have, but only 22 books, which contain the records of all past times, which are justly believed to be divine. And of them 5 belong to Moses, which contain his laws and the traditions of the origin of mankind till his death. This interval of time was little short of the 3,000 years. But as to the time from the death of Moses till the reign of Artaxerxes, king of Persia, who reigned after Xerxes, the prophets who were after Moses wrote down what was done in their times in 13 books. The remaining 4 books contain hymns to God and precepts for the conduct of human life. It is true, our history hath been written since Artaxerxes very particularly, but not hath been esteemed of the like authority with the former by our forefathers, because there hath not been an exact succession of prophets since that time, and how firmly we have given credit to these books of our own nation is evident by what we do. For during many so ages, as have already passed, no one has been so bold as either to add anything to them, to take anything from them, or to make any change in them. But it has become natural to all Jews immediately, and from their very birth, to esteem these books to contain divine doctrines, and to persist in them, and, if occasion, be willingly to die for them. In Antiquities of the Jews, 11:8, the historian Josephus also recounted a visit by Alexander the Great to Jerusalem around 332 BC, and he specifically mentioned the book of Daniel. Here's what he says. And when the book of Daniel was showed him, referring to, again, Alexander the Great, and again the year, note 332, wherein Daniel declared that one of the Greeks should destroy the empire of the Persians, he supposed that himself was the person intended. And as he was then glad, he dismissed the multitude for the present. But the next day he called them to him, and bid them ask what favors they pleased of him. Whereupon the high priest desired that they might enjoy the laws of their forefathers, and might pay no tribute to the 7th year. Ezekiel further mentions Daniel in Ezekiel 28:3. He said, "Are you wiser than Daniel? Is no secret hidden from you?" Ezekiel was written between 593 and 565 BC. Furthermore, Daniel is linguistically quite similar to Ezra, and both books are both in Hebrew and Aramaic. The bilingual composition of Ezra cannot be explained only on the basis of the presence of some official Aramaic letters, and I'm quoting again from Lau, 1999, because the Aramaic text often extends beyond those letters intended to be rendered in their original language, just as in the book of Daniel. And the first official letter, the famous Decree of Cyrus, is rendered in Hebrew. Moreover, the first change from Hebrew to Aramaic occurs in precisely the same literary manner. Reference Ezra 4:6-7 and Daniel 2:4, which is a proof that the term Timira in Daniel 2:4 cannot be considered a later insert to indicate a late redaction, say after the loss of the original language text. It is rather a mark of authenticity. Additionally, in the 2nd century, Greek was one of the primary languages spoken, so it is odd that Greek is not a substantial language used in the 2nd century book of Daniel, if written then. Kitchen points out, he says, but when Alexander and his successors took over the Orient by 330 BC and following, the role of Aramaic as the language of government must have declined visibly. The official tongue of the new rulers was Greek. Kitchen and others have studied Aramaic in Daniel, noting that it is imperial Aramaic. He says, within imperial Aramaic, it is tempting to classify this or that minor peculiarity as hinting that this or that document shows the east or west connections, but by and large, this is still unconvincing. In biblical Aramaic, word order in sentences having finite verbs is quite different from formal Northwest Semitic usage, which is verb, subject, etc. Instead, we find the subject commonly first, with the verb at the end of the sentence, having the object more often before than after it. Examples, subject-object-verb or subject-verb-object. This stands in striking contrast to the Dead Sea Scrolls Genesis Apocryphon of about the 1st century BC and Trigram of Job of the last century BC, both of them embarrassingly close in time to a supposedly 2nd century Daniel. But it agrees well with the word order of the Assur-Ostracon of the 7th century BC and with the freedom of order in the 5th century Aramaic papyri from Egypt. During the reign of Ptolemy II, between 285 and 246 BC, 72 translators translated the Hebrew, Torah, into Koine Greek in what is called the Septuagint. The rest of the scriptures are believed to have been translated by 150 BC. These are just a few of the many reasons to reject the notions that Daniel was written no earlier than 165 BC. But consider that even if the book were written so late, it still contain prophecies of specific dating that Jesus fulfilled, as I noted when we began. Thank you so much for coming by. I really appreciate it. Please like, subscribe, and come again. Goodbye.